One woman burned it all to the ground in a single night. She had a name the monks were later too afraid to write. They called her a curse, a fire sent from the heavens. They erased her face from history, but they could not erase what she did.
What makes a woman burn an entire world to ash? Not power, not gold, but losing everything until she had nothing left to lose.
To understand what she destroyed, you have to see what it was. Imagine an empire that stood for 1,000 years, richer than Rome, stronger than every neighbor it ever faced, so certain of itself that it believed it would outlive time itself. This was Aksum, an empire whose ships ruled 2 seas. Gold, ivory, and frankincense flowed through her ports like a river, wealth that made other empires jealous. Her stone towers pierced the sky, taller than anything men built around them. Aksum believed its time was eternal. But every empire that believes it cannot fall forgets one thing. Somewhere, a child is always being born who will prove it wrong. Legend says that on the night Yodit was born, the elders saw a sign in the sky, a red star low over the mountains. The old ones called it an omen of fire. They did not yet know whose fire it would be. She grew up in the high country, where the wind never stopped and the soil gave little. Her people were poor, but they were free, and they were proud. Even as a girl, she was different. While others lowered their eyes before the empire's tax collectors, Yodit stared back, and that look, they never forgot it. But to understand why Aksum feared her people, you have to understand the world they lived in. Legend says her people were old, older than Aksum's crosses. They worshipped different gods. They spoke an older tongue. And in an empire that called itself chosen by heaven, that made them something dangerous, something that had to be corrected. Some say she was a princess of a forgotten line, others a priestess. The truth is lost. But every account agrees on one thing: she was fierce, and she did not bow. By the time she was grown, Yodit had something rare in those hills: a reason to hope, a man she loved, a people who looked to her, a life worth protecting. That is what makes her story so terrible. She had everything to lose, and the empire was about to take all of it. And that pride was exactly what the empire decided to break. When the empire decided her people were a threat, it did not negotiate. It came to erase them. Their shrines were leveled, their elders silenced. Those who resisted were not spared. And by some accounts, that night, her entire family was among the dead. Everything she loved, taken in a single evening. And in that moment, something in her died. And in its place, something else was born. Cold, patient, willing to wait for years. Others bowed their heads and accepted their fate. Yodit made a different choice. She swore she would see Aksum burn.
Here's what made Yodit different from 1,000 others who lost everything. Rage that burns hot is forgotten by morning, but a revenge prepared for years in cold silence, that kind burns down entire kingdoms. And that is exactly how she walked, slowly, passionately, like a predator.
Her true face is lost to history, but her actions are clear. She went to everyone Aksum had also wronged tribes, exiled clans, warriors with no lord and no hope. The empire had spent centuries making enemies and never bothered to count them. Yodit did. She did not promise them gold. She did not promise them mercy. She promised them something far more powerful. She promised them revenge. One by one, the scattered clans came down from their valleys. Old rivals who had spilled each other's blood for generations sat at the same fire, because she had given them a single enemy to hate together.
We are one.
They say she made them swear an oath in the old way, a hand pressed to ash, a word spoken to the dark. From that night, they were no longer tribes. They were one blade, and she was the hand that held it. For years, she moved in the shadows, striking small, vanishing before the Empire could answer. A burned outpost here, a missing patrol there. The Empire called them bandits. It never imagined they were being trained. Her first real battle was not a victory. It was a lesson. The Empire sent a column to crush her, and she let them chase her deep into the mountains, into narrow passes where their numbers meant nothing. When the trap closed, the proud soldiers of Aksum learned what it meant to fight people who had nothing left to fear. Few of them ever came home. After that, the whispers began. In the markets, in the temples. A woman in the hills, a queen of ashes, a fire that could not be put out. In the darker versions of the story, they say she did something far bolder, that she walked into the great city herself, a servant, a shadow, a nobody, and lived among her enemies for weeks, that she learned which gate was weakest, which guard could be bought, that she stood in the shadow of the throne she would one day burn, and looked the king in the eye. He smiled at the servant girl. He had no idea he was looking at his death. We will never know if that is true, but we know what came next. In the golden halls, the court laughed and drank, certain the trouble in the hills was nothing. They did not hear the storm gathering with their name on its lips. And then, the storm began to move. The signal was fire. When the first flame rose on the city wall, the hills came alive. Thousands of torches, pouring down through the darkness like a river of fire. Some say the weakest gate opened from the inside, that the guards who had been bought simply stepped aside, and the gate that had held for 1,000 years swung open without a fight. What happened next, the chronicles describe in a single word: catastrophe. The city no one had dared to touch burned from end to end. Legend says she ordered them to destroy what Aksum was proudest of: its temples, its palaces, the great stone towers that had scraped the sky. One by one, the giants that had stood for centuries came crashing down into the dust. Common people fled into the night, unable to understand how their whole world could fall in a matter of hours. And in the middle of that inferno stood her, calm, still, watching the empire that took everything from her become exactly what it had made of her people: ash. By the dawn that lit the ruins, a 1,000-year dynasty no longer existed, and the woman who ended it took its throne. By some accounts, she ruled for nearly 40 years, a woman on a throne built from the ashes of the empire she destroyed. She wore no gold. She built no shining palace of her own. They say she ruled from the ruins themselves, a queen who refused to forget what it had cost. She gave her people the one thing the empire never had: the freedom to pray to their own gods, in their own tongue, without fear. But the priests she spared never forgave her. In hidden monasteries, far from her reach, they began to write, not history, a curse. They turned her name into a warning, whispered to frightened children for 1,000 years. Some say she was a tyrant who ruled through fear. Others that she was a liberator who finally set her people free. Perhaps she was both. The truth depends on who survived to tell it. But a throne built on ashes is a lonely place. She had her revenge. She just had no one left to share it with. No one knows how she died. Some say in battle, sword in hand. Some say old and alone on the throne of ashes. And some say she simply rode into the mountains one morning and was never seen again.
And here's what haunts me most. A woman who erased an entire kingdom from the earth, left almost no trace of herself. No tomb, no portrait we can trust. It's as if history itself was afraid of her and tried to forget.
The empire that stood 1,000 years vanished from the map, and the men who wrote the chronicles after her could not even agree on her name. Yodit, Gudit, Esato, and in one ancient tongue, simply fire. So who was she really? A liberator who avenged a people wiped from the earth? Or a monster who burned one of the greatest worlds of the ancient age? History never decided. Maybe you will.
So what is she to you? A liberator or a monster? Tell me in one word in the comments.